Julien Sorel, the main character of Stendhal's The Red and the Black, is one of the few characters in classic literature that truly embodies the complexity of the human psyche. Young, aspirational, and bright, Julien was born in a small French country village as the son of a carpenter and was burdened from a young age by his lowly beginnings. However, Julien refused to accept the destiny that society seems to have predetermined for him. For him, there had to be more to life than diligence and compliance. He viewed Napoleon as a role model for power and ascent, much like other young people do when they read about heroes. Julien aspired to greatness because he felt that it was the only way to break free from the invisibility that surrounded him, not because he was merely greedy. However, Julien's quest for greatness went beyond financial possessions. He was searching for some unnamed quality that burned within him like a desire. Thus, his pursuit of pleasure took many different forms. The joy of having authority, falling in love, and being appreciated. When Julien was employed to instruct the kids of Madame de Renal, the affluent mayor's wife, his life started to take a different turn. Her attention was immediately drawn to Julien because of his brains and beauty. Despite coming from a lowly background, he was skilled at influencing others' opinions. Although he didn't love Madame de Renal, he enjoyed having control over her. Seducing her was a triumph for him over the society that had cast him into a position of insignificance. However, he was not satisfied with this conquest. Although strong, the thrill of dominating and seducing was short-lived. Julien quickly discovered that he needed more. He aimed for renown in more important fields. Thus, he started dating Mathilde de la Mole, a marquis's daughter. In contrast to Madame de Renal, Mathilde was shrewd, aloof, and cunning. Gaining her favor required both social advancement and a new psychological game. As always, Julien threw himself into this new mission with all his might. However, something started to shift. He became aware that the more he defeated, the more empty he felt. Like a vista that fades as we go on, the pleasure he craved always appeared out of his grasp. Julien had to deal with the repercussions of his decisions at the end of his voyage. After his affair with Madame de Renal was made public, he was put on trial for attempting to kill her out of desperation. Julien had time to think about his life before being sentenced to the guillotine. He came to see that his constant pursuit of pleasure was an escape from himself rather than a quest for happiness. Even though Julien passed very young, his tale serves as a potent reminder. When pleasure is pursued as a goal unto itself, it can turn into a trap. He challenges us to consider our personal decisions and the costs associated with pursuing our pleasure. What drives us most? Neuroscience has spent decades attempting to provide an answer to this question. Furthermore, it is evident from Julien Sorel's path that he fell prey to the brain's own reward system. The reward system, a basic biological mechanism, mediates the joy we experience when we accomplish any kind of objective, no matter how big or tiny. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter that produces that sense of contentment and bliss, is released when it is engaged. Whether it was Madame de Renal's attention, Mathilde's awe, or the sense of authority that accompanied his social victories, Julien felt this each time he obtained what he desired. But there is an issue with the human brain. It immediately adjusts. It's similar to purchasing new sneakers. You are ecstatic at first, but eventually they are simply another commonplace object. We refer to this phenomena as hedonic adaptation. In actuality, this indicates that Julien never felt truly content with his triumphs. They were brief, yet intense. According to recent studies, the reward circuit is especially responsive to anticipation and novelty. This clarifies Julien's incessant pursuit of novel challenges and accomplishments, because his mind was constantly asking, what's next? He wasn't satisfied with what he already had. Furthermore, Julien was motivated by a deeper need for approval. According to psychological research like Abraham Maslow's, after basic needs are satisfied, people begin to seek out a sense of acceptance and respect. For Julien, bodily pleasure was secondary to recognition and admiration. He desired to feel that he was seen and that his life had purpose. But this never-ending hunt created a vicious circle. Each time Julien accomplished a goal, he was immediately disappointed and went looking for the next one. Rather than serving as a tool for his well-being, The reward system turned into a trap that prevented him from ever finding calm and kept him moving all the time. This same mechanism can be observed in daily actions like social network addiction. The reward circuit is triggered by each like, remark, and notice, starting a never-ending loop of seeking more. Like Julian, a lot of individuals nowadays are caught in a vicious cycle of fleeting but meaningless joy that keeps them from achieving long-term contentment. The fact that this cycle may cause us to overlook the things that are truly important is even more concerning. In his pursuit of happiness and approval, Julian ruined relationships, deceived others, and ultimately lost everything. He is a terrible illustration of what happens when we let the reward system to rule us, rather than utilizing it as a means to achieve more. Could Julian have made other decisions, though, if he had known how his brain operated? This query prompts us to consider an alternative viewpoint, namely philosophy. We'll look at how philosophers like Epicurus and Schopenhauer can help us comprehend the pursuit of pleasure and its repercussions in the upcoming chapter. The pursuit of pleasure has existed for as long as people. This topic has been discussed extensively since the time of the first philosophers. Ultimately, can pleasure lead to happiness, or is it merely a delusion that traps us in a never-ending cycle of discontent? Julian Sorel is a perfect example of how philosophy views pleasure because of his fixation on success and approval. Consider Epicurus as an example. Frequently misinterpreted, Epicurus promoted a balanced existence founded on basic pleasures and the absence of pain rather than the unrestrained pursuit of pleasure. He felt that achieving peace and avoiding excess are the keys to great enjoyment. But Julian took the opposite action. He looked for extravagant and powerful pleasures because he thought they would satisfy the void in his life. Arthur Schopenhauer is another philosopher who sheds light on Julian. According to Schopenhauer, there is a never-ending circle of desire and discontent throughout life. We want something, fight to get it, and when we do, we find that it hasn't made us happy the way we had thought. A terrible illustration of this is Julian. He desired love, power, and social progress, but even after achieving these things, he still felt hollow. In the modern world, this philosophical viewpoint is very pertinent. The culture in which we live pushes us to look for the next big pleasure, the newest phone model, the ideal getaway, and the ideal partnership. However, as Schopenhauer noted, this quest frequently leaves us feeling more irritated than satisfied. Additionally, Ruben Alves provides us with an intriguing analysis of pleasure. According to him, having too many alternatives and stimulation causes a sort of soul anesthesia. Julian never had time to appreciate what he already had, since he was always looking for more. He never lived in the now, since he was constantly thinking about the next objective. Nietzsche, what about him? He then cautioned us about the perils of living by socially imposed external standards. Julian desired acceptance from a culture that hated him for coming from a lowly background. His goal was an attempt to prove his value to others. It was not sincere. Nietzsche would advise us to pursue genuine joy that comes from within rather than from other people's praise. These philosophical observations demonstrate how pleasure may turn into a trap when pursued unchecked or for the wrong reasons. This is demonstrated by Julian. He spent his entire life on a pursuit that ultimately left him feeling more empty and lost than before. However, we must examine the psychological and emotional aspects of Julian's biography in order to comprehend even more fully what brought him to this point. We'll look at how Julian's path was influenced by things like trauma, self-worth, and social validation in the upcoming chapter. We'll also look at how these same problems impact our daily lives. Referring back to Julian Sorel's tragic tale, we may observe that his unrelenting quest for pleasure was motivated by both intense psychological need and ambition. He had more than just conquering in mind. He desired attention. And one of the primary causes of human behavior that frequently verges on self-destructive behavior is the need for social validation. Carl Rogers, one of the pioneers of humanistic psychology, developed a theory of self-esteem that explains this pursuit. According to Rogers, everyone has a basic urge to be liked and respected by other people. In Julian's case, his capacity to impress and win admiration was inextricably related to his sense of self-worth. He believed that his accomplishments closely correlated with his worth. Social comparison, as defined by social psychologists, intensifies this phenomena. In Julian's highly hierarchical society, a person's value was determined by their status and social standing. He felt inferior due to his lowly beginnings and was always comparing himself to the powerful and aristocratic. He would go on an unrestrained quest for approval in an attempt to make up for this sense of inadequacy. Neuroscience can explain this tendency by looking at how the brain interprets social acceptance and rejection. Research indicates that the same parts of the brain linked to physical pain are activated when someone is rejected. To put it another way, it hurts to be disregarded or undervalued. In an attempt to escape this suffering, Julian continuously looked for circumstances that would provide him with the opposite: the joy of being acknowledged and accepted. However, all of this is cruelly ironic. The joy Julian felt at being acknowledged was never long-lasting. The human brain is designed to look for ever-increasing stimuli. We refer to this as hedonic tolerance. What was once thrilling eventually becomes the usual, and we require more stimuli to have the same feeling. Julian was a part of this cycle. Every accomplishment soon lost its shine, and in order to sustain the enjoyment, he required a fresh challenge. We observe this same tendency in many people in daily life. Consider a person who is continuously searching social media for comments and likes, or someone who always purchases new items yet is never quite content. These individuals, like Julian, are caught in a vicious loop of external validation, where their worth is determined by what other people believe about them. Psychology also aids in our comprehension of how early experiences and traumas contribute to this kind of conduct. Julian was raised in a household where his family hated him all the time. His view of himself and his desire to prove his value to the world were influenced by this early rejection. He wasn't merely looking for fun, he was attempting to mend severe emotional scars. Lastly, neuroscience demonstrates that the human brain's ability to handle frequent rewards is limited. Our reward system may become dysregulated if we are constantly exposed to stimuli, such as romantic love, pecuniary pleasure, or social acknowledgement. As Julian demonstrated, this results in compulsive behavior, and he would do anything to preserve his sense of validation and superiority. But what does this teach us? According to psychology, genuine self-worth cannot be derived from other people's acceptance. Unfortunately, Julian was unaware of this. In actuality, his quest for approval was an escape from himself. We will examine how this dynamic is reflected in daily life in the upcoming chapter. We'll see how the pursuit of pleasure and approval shows up in both little and major ways, from our relationships with friends and family to the expectations placed on us by contemporary society. It's time to apply this conversation to real-world situations after exploring philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. In the end, what relevance do the tale of Julien Sorel and the idea of pleasure-seeking have to our modern way of life? Our time is characterized by a culture that values quick satisfaction. Do you want to eat? Use the app to place your order. Do you want to feel accepted? Share content on social media and watch for likes. Are you looking for a diversion? You only need to click to access countless films, TV shows, and games. Although these conveniences can provide short-term respite, they also highlight the dangers of an endless pursuit of pleasure. Consider social media. According to studies, the brain produces dopamine with every like or encouraging comment, the same neurotransmitter linked to food and sex as rewards. However, as Julian Sorel found out through his social victories, this emotion is ephemeral. To have the same degree of fulfillment, you need more and more. As a result, you become psychologically dependent on the next external stimuli, making happiness appear unattainable at all times. Consumption is another common example. In the same way that Julian pursued social advancement to feel appreciated, many people today gauge their value by worldly possessions. The latest automobile, the most sophisticated mobile phone, and high-end clothing. All of this turns into a status symbol. However, what occurs if the novelty wears off? These individuals, like Julian, learned that the fulfillment they were pursuing was only temporary and that they now require something more to satisfy the emptiness. The pursuit of pleasure is also apparent in the realm of interpersonal interactions. The pursuit of transient pleasures frequently takes the place of the human bond in a society where relationships may be started and ended with a single finger swipe. Julian is a tragic example of this because of his impetuous and cunning connections. Despite his desire for love, he viewed others as means to his own approval. What about the job? Many of us have been socialized to think that the primary route to happiness is achieving professional success. However, as Julian found out, the constant pursuit of fame and prestige may leave a path of weariness and discontent. In pursuit of an often insufficient return, we put in more hours at work and forfeit time spent with friends and family. Lastly, the effect this endeavor has on mental health. This never-ending quest for approval and pleasure frequently makes anxiety, stress, and depression worse. Julian is a prime illustration of the harm that can result from this. He is emotionally spent and unable to find inner peace as a result of his fixation with success. What can we do in our daily lives to prevent slipping into this trap? We can consider what truly makes us happy, even though this video isn't meant to provide answers. Is it the actual connection with our identity or the acknowledgement of others? Is it the short-term joy or the long-term fulfillment that comes from living by our own principles? Although Julian Sorel never discovered these solutions, his tale serves as a potent cautionary tale. When pursued mindlessly, pleasure can turn into a prison, and since we're stuck in a never-ending race for something that will never be enough, we frequently neglect to live life to the fullest in this cage. After all, is pursuing pleasure a true route to happiness, or is it merely a delusion that diverts our attention from the important things in life? Please remember to give a like if this video changed your perspective and got you thinking. This not only helps me reach more people, but also shows that content like this makes sense to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message.